Terence Crawford speaks on Manny Pacquiao's career, says that he's a generational talent, but ultimately he doesn't believe that Manny Pacquiao did it all on his own, which is ultimately implying that Manny Pacquiao took steroids. Obviously, there were a lot of rumors about that. Everybody just can't seem to believe the fact that a guy from the Philippines was able to go up from 100 pounds to 154 to fight a guy like Antonio Margarito, who was basically 20, 30 pounds heavier than him fight night. Manny's accomplished a lot. He's the only 8 division world champion in the sport of boxing. His generational legacy is undeniable at this point in the sport of boxing. He's a Hall of Famer, a solidified first ballot Hall of Famer, probably one of the best fighters we're ever going to see. And for Terence Crawford to say that, obviously, you can't help but think it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, talking about a legend and then hearing a guy that, you'd think that Terence Crawford would understand, moving up in weight classes himself, the significance of what Manny was able to do, and I'm sure he does, but to say that he doesn't believe Manny did it alone is kind of crazy, in my opinion. I think him being associated with Snack, him and Devin Haney both being associated with Snack and Victor Conti, a guy that's actually been accused and proven guilty of using banned substances and providing professional athletes in the past with banned substances. Meanwhile, Manny's never actually tested positive for anything and has gone through his career, a hardworking fighter. So I feel like that's discrediting Manny's accomplishments coming from Terence Crawford, because ultimately Bud Crawford was supposed to get a Manny Pacquiao fight. He obviously wanted a Manny Pacquiao fight. So why would you want to fight him if you think, he's not this, he's not that? Ultimately, Manny is a great fighter, but if you're saying that he's a generational talent and then following that up with PED accusations, I just don't think that's that's not really respecting Manny. That's disrespecting him, honestly, because it's like you're being fake to him, you're being fake nice, it's a fake kind of respect, but ultimately you don't think that he accomplished it by himself. So, that's his opinion. He's allowed to have his opinion. I think a lot of us would disagree with it. I mean, why is it so shocking? Even Floyd, Floyd has had his opinions on Manny Pacquiao and doing the blood test and everything. And I know, I'm Filipino, Manny was a great inspiration to not only, Filipinos, but anybody, who's a boxing fan who loves watching the sport, and boxers themselves, they all look up to Manny because they all know what he's accomplished in the sport is undeniable. And not trying to disrespect Terence Crawford or anything like that, but I'm sure he's just a little salty that he never got that Manny Pacquiao fight. And that's understandable, because there were moments in Manny Pacquiao's career where maybe he had the ability to fight Terence Crawford, but honestly, Bud wasn't a big name at the time, And even now, Terence Crawford's a tremendous fighter. I think he's top 2 pound for pound right now. But at the time when Manny was at the top of the welterweight division, Terence Crawford wasn't a big fight for him. There were other fights that Manny Pacquiao took. They lined it up, and he took care of business for most of the fights that Manny Pacquiao had. Manny was doing his thing. Terence Crawford was still coming up. His name was still growing. It wasn't like Terence Crawford was the biggest name out there. Yeah, he was a contender. He was a champ. He got a belt. But ultimately, Manny Pacquiao was fighting big names. He was fighting people that everybody wanted to see him fight. It was towards the latter end of his career where Terence Crawford was a legitimate opponent for him. And then even so, if Terence Crawford wants to say stuff like Manny's ducked him or whatever the case may be, I don't think that's fair to say, because look at what Manny did. Floyd even had his accusations against Manny for PED usage, but who's the one that actually tested positive for a banned IV? That was Floyd. Manny, you could say anything you want about Manny, that he took PEDs, but he's never tested positive for anything. Everything was just skeptical stuff. People just accusing Manny of doing this, doing that, just discrediting the hard work. But at the end of the day, Floyd is the only one between Manny and Floyd who's ever actually tested positive for an IV, something that was banned by WADA when they were doing the blood testing. So let's be real about what's actually happened. And then you have a guy like Terence Crawford who's talking about how Manny Pacquiao probably didn't do it alone, that he probably took PEDs. He's associated with Snack, somebody that's actually been convicted of using this kind of stuff, using PEDs. Manny's never tested positive for anything, so I just disagree with everybody saying that Manny took steroids. I think he's a hardworking fighter, and people just can't believe a guy from the Philippines is, you know, beating up their favorite fighters and was able to become an 8-division world champion, something that no one will ever do in the sport of boxing again. So shout out to Manny for, you know, continuing to do great deeds. You know, his career was amazing, but, you know, just not a big fan of anybody discrediting his accomplishments and saying that he, you know, and accusing him of using PEDs. I just don't mess with that. But let me know in the comments what you guys think down below. Thank you guys for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys on the next NAS boxing video. Peace.